Hi, my name is Cindy Rang with the Fabric Patch in Ephrata, Washington, and today we're going to talk about multiple things. We're going to talk about strip piecing, nestled seams, on-point math, and even a quick little clipping trick. So as we go through this series and we're working on all of our rows for our row sampler, it's important that not only that you know the math and follow the pattern to complete the row that we're doing, but for me it's important that you learn some other quilting skills along the way so that you have some new knowledge to be able to use up your leftover bits and pieces to make something that's more creative and something that's all you. So one of the critical quilting skills that you need to have is on-point math. It's actually very, very simple. There's only 3 numbers that you need to know. You've probably already found them on the corner of this month's block on your pattern. So it's all listed there. And for those of you that are not following along with the pattern, I'll put a little insert for you. But there's 3 numbers. So what we're going to do is we're just going to come over for a second to the board, and I'm going to show you what I mean by on-point math. This is just a charm pack. So this charm pack, these are just some 5-inch squares from Stiletto by Moda, and it's going to stand in for me as quilt blocks. So let's just say that we're making a quilt and we have made 9 blocks out of maybe 20 we were supposed to make. And maybe for some reason you're just sick of the quilt and you are done and all you're going to do is make these 9 blocks, but you want your quilt maybe to be bigger. Well, what happens is for these particular blocks, if you start to put them together, they're only going to be so big. So for these are of course 5 inches. So if I were going to put all of these together and you've got essentially, 15 inches of space, if you put something on point, you have increased the size of this block by 40%. The absolute math is 1.414. So what's happened is I've taken 5 inches, I've put it on point, and now it's 6 inches. So, well, a little over 6 inches. So if I were to do this, and if I were to lay these end to end, this would make up 15 inches. And if I do these point to point, this is 21 inches. So it's made a huge difference by doing this. So this is a way to turn fewer blocks into a larger quilt. So that's why it's an important thing to know how to do. So once I've put these blocks on point, you do have these spaces in here, but that's no big deal. All you have to do is just find some sort of a background. You can put that block in there. What happens with this is it really helps to show off the blocks that you did piece. So each block is going to kind of stand alone. So this is where it gets a little bit tricky, are these side setting blocks and the corner setting blocks. And this is what bothers people a little bit, because people think that all they have to do is, so these are 5-inch blocks, and so this is a 5-inch block. So people think that if they just take one more 5-inch block and cut it in half, it will work. Let me show you what will happen if I do that. If I cut this in half, what will happen is on this board, it's exactly the right size, but as soon as I sew everything and I do my seam allowance, what's going to happen is this point is going to be blunted, which means that where everything comes to a point and you see your points here, you won't see points on the edge. So that's really where there's a problem, and that's why people don't like to do this. Well, here's the deal. All you have to do is your side setting has to be 7/8 of an inch bigger. So I've done that here. So if you look here, here is a strip. These were my 5-inch blocks. This is my 5 7/8 inch. So people get a little bit bajiggity about an 1/8 inch mark, but I think I've mentioned this before. It's really just another line on the ruler. So if you look up close here, Here I am, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and there's my little 1/8 inch mark. And it's just another mark on the ruler, totally doesn't matter. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 7/8. So I've already pre-cut this strip. I'm at 5 and 7/8. I'm gonna cut that off. I'm gonna turn this and cut on the diagonal. Now what's happened is I have my side setting triangles. They're going to be a little bit bigger. So as I put that in there, see that extra right there? So what's going to happen is as I sew all of this together, this is going to give me this nice little seam allowance on the outside edge so that when I go to sew my first border on, I haven't blunted that point right there. So that's why this is important. Now you have your corner setting block. Your corner setting block is 1 1/4 inch bigger than whatever this block is. So again, this is 5 inches. So this will be 6 1/4 inches. So I have one here. This is my 6 1/4 inch block. And then all you have to do is cut it in half on the diagonal and in half on the other diagonal. It's going to look like this. And here's my, and you only need one block. And so it's going to go just like this. With your one block, you're going to get your 4 corners. Put this one here, this one here, and this one is going to go over here. Okay, so I'm just going to cut my others here. And then, in fact, let me cut these really quick and let me show you how you'll sew this together. This one is going to go there. So what's nice about this technique is that if you just have some random leftover blocks, doesn't matter what size they are, makes absolutely no difference. If you've inherited some blocks, if you found some really cute fabric that you've cut into some squares and you found that you miscut it, you were supposed to use 10-inch squares for your pattern and you accidentally cut it 9-inch, it doesn't matter. Just change what you're thinking, use those 9-inch squares, add something else in there or another color, whatever you'd like, and then just figure out your side setting and your corner setting. Again, super simple, 7/8 of an inch bigger than your block size, 1 1/4 inch bigger for your corner size. All right, so once you've put all of these in here, one more for this side, then what you do is you do a diagonal row sewing. This is the other thing that bothers people a little bit. I don't know why, it doesn't matter. Normally we're used to sewing blocks together in a row. What you're going to do though is we're going to think of this as row 1, this is row 2. So all you're going to do is put this together, sew this one, press it, put this one together, sew it, press it, and then come back and sew this one on. Right sides together, sew it and press it. Do the same thing. There's this row, this row, this row. We're going to show this in detail when we put our row together, but this is side setting math. Those numbers, the numbers are, it will increase it by 41%, 1.414, 1 1/4 inch, 7/8 inch. So let's look at this for a second. I just want to show you this. Some people talk about on-point blocks, and you can do kind of the same thing. So here again is more of, this is that fabric. This is that stiletto charm pack. It's kind of pretty fabric. Here's another one out of there. So if this is my block, your other option is to take the same size block. So this is again a 5-inch square. Here's 2 more 5-inch squares. And what I'm going to do is take these and cut in half on the diagonal. And then what I'll do is same thing. And actually, if you find the center by putting a little finger press in it, find the center. I really should put on my glasses. Then all you have to do is line up your little mark, put that on there, sew that seam, press it open. Do the same thing down here, find your center mark, right sides together, sew that seam, press it open. Do the same thing with this one, find your center, and sew that on. You end up with this block on point. Then what happens, you end up with far more here than your 1/4 inch. But what happens is it does get a little bit wonky. So then after when you're ready to trim it, you can go ahead and just line up with your ruler, square everything up, add your 1/4 inch seam allowance, and then your block would look something sort of like this. Where then what you have is you have your block on point, but you've added your side setting or corner setting stuff so that instead of sewing on the diagonal, what would happen is you would essentially have this funny little seam that would be coming in here, if that makes sense, right? It would be in like this, so you'd have all of your blocks would be put together. My opinion is that this is easier. This is way easier because all I'm doing is I'm sewing my row on the diagonal. There isn't anything strange about it. This, there's a whole lot of added steps and there's wasted fabric because once I've sewn this together, I have to square it up. But this is a good technique also to know because the other thing is, so this was a 6-inch block. By putting it on point, it's now an 8.5 inch block. If I want it to be even bigger, I'm going to take my 8.5 inches, do it this way, cut my diagonals, sew it on, and now it could be a 12-inch block. So here's my original one, on point again. So you can just keep going, and again, you're increasing that block by 40% each time. So this is your on point math. You'll use this as you're creating other things, hopefully. And let's go ahead and move on to talk about this row. So our row is this one up here. This block is called a 25 patch. The reason it's called a 25 patch is because there's 25 little squares in there, 5 by 5. We're always familiar with a 9 patch, which is of course 9 squares, or a 4 patch, which is 4 squares. So that's what we're doing, and we're going to put that one on point. In your pattern, you're told to make 5 squares. Part of that is because that gives you a little insurance block, and the other reason is because as an option, it will become your pot for your flowers in a later week. So what we're going to do is we're going to come back to this in a second, but first let's talk about how to make a 25 patch. You want to start by selecting your fabrics, and I would probably stick with mostly mediums and darks. You are going to use your background for this row. I do tend to throw in some lights just as little kind of exciting little pieces, but choose whatever you'd like. What you're going to do is you're going to cut 10 strips that are width of fabric. WOF is what it says in your pattern, which means width of fabric. And so that's, of course, from salvage to salvage is 42 inches. So you're going to cut 10 of these strips, and then all you're going to do is you're just going to lay these out in whatever row, whatever fashion you'd like. So this was my strip set. I've cut quite a bit off of this, so let's pretend that this is still 42 inches long. After you've sewn 5 strips together, you're going to press it. And when you press everything one direction. So we've been taught that you always press to the light so you don't see anything behind it. Sometimes we break those rules for specific reasons. This is one of those. So we're going to press everything one direction, and then again, let's say this is 42 inches. You're going to line this up and cut and line this up and start with a nice clean edge. Turn it around, and then you're going to cut. Your strip width was 2 1/4 inches. That means that what you're cutting here is 2 1/4 inches. So you're going to cut these, and then what will happen is after you've cut a bunch of them, you'll cut from this strip set and your second strip set, which will give you an opportunity to move things around a little bit. So you can flip things around, and when you're flipping them around, remember we talked about pressing all one direction. So these are all going this way, these are all going this way. When we turn this one around, now what happens is we have an opportunity to nestle seams. So using all of these little pieces from this strip set and our next one, flip things around, alternate things a little bit, and then when you're ready to start sewing them together, this is where you nestle your seams. I'm going to show you a close-up of nestling your seams. So again, this is pressed this way, this one is pressed that way. So what will happen is when you put that in there, it just nestles. It absolutely locks in place there, doesn't go anywhere, so that when I go to sew my 5 rows of squares together, that's going to lock. I go down to my next one. That one is going to lock. Go to my next one. And they just go all the way down so that everything locks in place, which means that when you look at your finished block, everything comes out exactly right. All of your points are right where they should be. So that's that idea of nestling seams. So once you've sewn your strip sets, you've cut your strip lengths, you've fiddled around a little bit, put your 5 rows together, sew them together, press your block. Now we're ready to go ahead and put our row together. When you are finished sewing all of your sets together, your block should be approximately 9 1/4 by 9 1/4. It may not be. If it's not, it absolutely doesn't matter. What I would do is take the average size of your blocks. And let's say that your blocks are 9 inches square. If they're 9 inches square, then for your side setting, you're going to cut these squares 9 7/8 by 9 7/8. Let's say these are 8 1/2. If they're 8 1/2, then you're going to cut this approximately 9 1/4. So what will happen is you'll take this block, you're going to set these on point. These are my triangles. This is the square that's 7/8 of an inch bigger. I'm going to cut it in half, and these become my side setting, just like we talked about before. So we're going to lay these out, and then if this is a 9-inch block, then my corner square triangle is going to be 10 1/4. I'm going to take one square, cut in half on both diagonals, have that somewhere, and that's what's going to go right here. Once you have everything laid out, you're going to do it the same way that we talked about it before. So here's our little row. So you're going to sew this row on, and you just want to be careful that when you go from here to the sewing machine, you've laid this over and you're sewing it exactly where on the side that you need to. Press that one back open, come back over, sew this one on, then you can go ahead and sew your end on. Then we're going to do our next row. We're going to sew this one on here, and I just do one at a time, because if you're going to mess up, this is where it'll be. You're going to lay this whole thing, and then all of a sudden you're going to sew at this end instead. So I just go back and forth, doing one at a time. Once you've sewn that, you're going to do that same thing and you're going to nestle those seams. And you'll keep going. So let's look at these nestled seams for a minute because I want to show you something. Every once in a while I break the rules. The deal with breaking the rules is you have to understand the rules, and once you understand them, you can make your own decision about which rules you want to break. When we've talked before, I've mentioned that the non-breakable rules are always use quality fabric, always sew with a 1/4 inch seam allowance because your math depends on it, and measure twice, cut once. So some things, the rest of those things, it doesn't really matter. I do weird things with colors, I do weird things with, I may or may not pin, I might press a little bit differently. I don't have any rules related to steam, you can use it or not. But press to the dark is one of those rules that I sometimes break. I will, if I have white fabric and I'm using red or black, I do everything I can to make sure that I'm pressing to the dark so you can't see that funny little thing, under that funny little seam allowance underneath the white fabric. But I also am a long arm quilter and I hate the bulk that you find in those seams. That's why I use a point trimmer, and I'm going to show you this seam right here. That's also why there's 2 different things that I do, and one is a clipping trick. And what that means is when you've sewn this, and you have this seam here where you've sewn, you either have to press all one way or all the other way. And then what happens is you end up with something kind of funny. So if you just come in here and you just take your little sharp tipped scissors and you just cut right up to the seam, you can lay flat there so you don't have all of that bulk and you don't have 8 different pieces of fabric in one spot. The other thing is, notice that I've got all of this and I'm pressing to the light right here, which might seem wrong. Part of it is, you know, this is light, but it's not white. I don't think you're going to see anything through it. But the other reason is because if I pressed to the dark, again, what I would have is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 layers right there. And so if I'm quilting, I'm going to feel that. So I'm going to go ahead and just press that open, or press that over rather, so that I know where all of that bulk is and it's not quite so bad. And as a long arm quilter, I'm not going to feel it. So again, that is just what I do. You can do what works best for you. You can make your own decisions. Once you have everything together, finish sewing this together, finish pressing this, it should end up the same as your others at about 48 inches. Again, if it doesn't, you know, the other thing that you can do is maybe don't finish off all of your trimming. And that was what we've talked about in some of the previous rows, is that once you're done with this, don't measure that 1/4 inch and trim everything off. Just leave your row pieced, because you might find if you look up. In fact, let me just move some stuff out of the way. Oh, dang it. I really need, I'm just going to keep going.